Hockey, answer your phone. Hockey. Call time. No, don't.
Does someone know how the sound system works? Where's Leo? I'm not doing all the speaking. There we go.
How's everybody feeling? Who's embassy? Venezuela's embassy. Say hell no, Juan Guaido, right? Yeah. Juan Guaido? Hell no. Juan Guaido? Hell no.
Hell no. Hello, hell no.
How are you? We got one over here. I'm doing well. Yeah. It's great. I mean, I'm just myself. Just really happy. That's too cool, right? Just gotta take a picture. Man, I got a great idea. I'm gonna take pictures and put them on Facebook. That'll change the world. Yeah. What a great idea, huh? Yeah. Wow, what a concept. It was really good until about maybe 8 or 9 months ago. I would always get like 1,000, sometimes 32,000 shares.
All right, well, we're waiting for the speaker. Can you hear me? It's so exciting to see such a full house tonight. And I want to thank all the people who've been helping. Thank you. Ty, we got it working. Yay! So, raise your hand if you're planning to spend the night at the embassy. Whoa! Fantastic. Raise your hand if you spend any night at the embassy. So, as you know, this is unprecedented. I don't think there's ever been anything like this in the United States before, where ordinary citizens like us have come out in solidarity with the elected government of a country to protect it from our own government. Because let's be absolutely clear, Juan Guaido's representatives could not take over a McDonald's in this city were it not for Donald Trump and his neocons and folks in the White House who are orchestrating this whole thing. So here we are, people power, and what better place to be than in the Chavez Library, resisting the empire. And I feel Chavez smiling at us right now.
Right.
And certainly the eyes of Chavez are looking down on us as we are here. So we want to start this out with a representative of the Venezuelan government, who is the Deputy Foreign Minister. Would love to be here with us, but he is in New York with the Foreign Minister and want to send us a message.
Hi everyone, my name is Carlos, I'm Vice Minister of Foreign Relations from Venezuela. We want to first of all thank you all for standing up for international law, for the well-being of the Venezuelan embassy in Washington. It's been important to hear your voices, to hear your call for the respect of Venezuelan national sovereignty, for the respect of Venezuela's popular will in electing President Maduro, and for safeguarding our embassy and our premises. I just wanted to express to you, on behalf of all of the people of Venezuela, on behalf of all the Bolivarian government, how lucky we feel to have friends in the United States that are standing up for justice and are standing up for what's right and for the respect of the will of the Venezuelan people. We're glad to hear that you are meeting constantly in the embassy, that you have made it a place where debate, democracy, dialogue can really be established and can really flourish. Hopefully this is what we can maintain in our premises for a long time. I know today you're having a very important educational meeting to talk about the way that our region, Latin America, has been constantly intervened by foreign forces and by foreign interests that have attempted against democracy and against social justice. So hopefully today will be a very fulfilling encounter, and that we help each other to understand our region and to make sure that our countries respect international law and respect justice. So thank you very much for being there, for being in solidarity with us, and please remember that the people of Venezuela are always in solidarity with the people of the United States.
We love Carlos, by the way. We love Carlos. We're sad he can't be in the United States, but that's just the reality of U.S. politics. Carlos was tremendously helpful to us when we were in Venezuela recently, on so many levels. I'm sure others who have been to Venezuela have found the same thing. And he was so happy. I have never seen such a big smile on somebody's face when we were walking in to meet with President Maduro. He was with us, walking down the hall, and he had the biggest smile on his face. He just loved it. So we appreciate Carlos greatly. My name is Kevin Zeese, by the way. I'm with Popular Resistance. I want to mention that some of you probably saw the Secret Services outside, very openly showing their presence, their intimidation, but we know we're not intimidated. And that we saw the Secret Service, we could call them the Secret Police, I guess, the Secret Service in the backyard early this morning, taking pictures of the building. Medea Benjamin and I went out and spoke with them to see what was up, and they were very vague. They said that they were not planning to enter the embassy, I said that's good because the Vienna Convention forbids the U.S. government from entering an embassy. The government's job is to protect an embassy. That's the job of the U.S. government. And we are here as the Embassy Protection Collective.
Yeah.
Civilians are doing the job that the U.S. government should be doing. And we've been here for quite a while, and we plan to stay here for the foreseeable future until Venezuela and the United States talk to each other. I know that sounds so minimal, but we are talking to an adolescent president. Talk to each other and work out a relationship. There's also an embassy in Venezuela, in Caracas, the U.S. embassy that's vacant. Should the Venezuelan government do something there? We don't think so, and I hope they don't. We don't want to see that kind of tit for tat that escalates into a conflict. But we're here as civilians to protect the embassy, to stand up for the Vienna Convention, to stand against trespass, to stand against the coup, a coup that has failed in Venezuela.
Yeah.
The people of Venezuela have rejected Guaido. They know he's a U.S. puppet. They know he's tied to the U.S. government. They know the economic problems they're facing are coming from the U.S. government. They know the electrical grid being attacked is coming from the U.S. government. They know the attempted assassination of President Maduro came from the U.S. government. They know that Guaido's chief of staff had plans for terrorism in the United States, paid for by the U.S. government. $1 billion the U.S. planning on spending, of money seized from Venezuela to cause chaos in Venezuela with terrorism. This has all come out of documents, cell phones, computers seized from Juan Guaido's chief of staff and bodyguard. They were planning on bringing in mercenaries from Central America, trained in Colombia, funded through the Bank of America, dressed in military uniforms of the Venezuelan government to try to pretend that the military is opposed to Maduro. The military supports Maduro. They support the Constitution of Venezuela, which you can see Hugo Chavez reading in some of these pictures here. And there's this second picture, the fourth picture, he's reading the Venezuelan Constitution there. So we're standing with the Venezuelan people in solidarity. And so tonight we have a really fantastic show for you, incredible speaker, who I'm not going to introduce. I'm going to introduce somebody else who is very important to us as well, the lawyer, one of the lawyers for the Embassy Protection Collective, Mara Verhaven Hilliard, constitutional lawyer, well known in Washington, D.C., directs the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, has run many cases that have expanded the rights of protesters in Washington, D.C., and she's here on behalf of our collective, wants to give you all a few words. Please welcome Mara.
Who's not here, I want to say that people around the country should be aware of what's happening. This room, this building is filled with people who have come from all over the United States to stand here, to stay in this building, and to stand up while it's called the Embassy Protection Collective. It's a collective standing up for human rights, for democracy, for international law, for all the things that John Bolton, that Pompeo, that Donald Trump are not standing up for. So these are people of the United States who are fighting for the things that we hold dear. And the Vienna Convention, as Kevin mentioned, is what governs international buildings, diplomatic structures and relations. Under the Vienna Convention, an embassy is inviolable. Even if there are bad relations, even if relations break down, the embassy is inviolable. The U.S. government cannot just seize the embassy at its whim. Now, as Kevin mentioned, the Secret Service has been coming here. They've been threatened by State Department representatives. And we want to send a very clear message, which is that everyone is here lawfully at the invitation of the people lawfully in charge of this building. These are not trespassing. in charge of this building, which is owned by the government of Venezuela. Second, there are laws in the District of Columbia that protect people from eviction. And people have been staying here and sleeping here and have been here for a long period of time. In order for the government to remove people under eviction, there are due process requirements that have not been met. There's been no notice, there's been no due process, there's been no opportunity to challenge an attempted eviction. So the message that we want to say to every single State Department official, to every Secret Service officer, to every police officer in the Metropolitan Police Department, to any U.S. Marshal, to anyone who is thinking about taking action against the people who are lawfully present in this building. It is our view, it is the view of the collective, that any such action is an unlawful act, and that we will hold personally responsible anyone that orders or effectuates or carries out an unlawful act, an unlawful seizure, or an unlawful arrest of any person who is standing up for democracy, for human rights, and against their government, this government, the government of the United States, illegal coup. So for all the people who are present here today and who are staying strong, I want to say it's an amazing, amazing event, and it's an amazing signal and message to the U.S. government that the people of the United States will not fold and will not be cowed and will not be threatened with illegal actions. Who is the National Director of the Answer Coalition, and he's going to introduce tonight's featured speaker.
Ryan.
Thank you, Mara, and thanks to everyone here and to all of the people who are watching us on Facebook live stream, and all of those people who have responded in the last days, in the last weeks, to the appeal from the collective. A real special, I would say, debt of gratitude from all of us in the progressive movement to Medea Benjamin. Including the Answer Coalition and others, have rallied to this cause, but frankly, without their having been the anchor for this collective, this would not actually be able to happen. So it shows that individuals and organizations, but even small numbers of individuals, make a difference. That's how progressive movements start. People say, oh, you're so small. How can you effectuate change? Well, of course you're small until you get bigger. And that's what's happening. We're getting bigger, we're getting stronger. The featured speaker tonight is John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou. I see John Kiriakou every day. Because
You're a lucky guy.
Because we co-host a daily 2-hour show on Radio Sputnik called Loud and Clear, which is on Washington, D.C. radio stations, other stations, and it's a podcast in many places. And, you know, it's been very, very interesting, of course, to work together every day to evaluate, assess, analyze, have great guests on, amazing experience for those of us presenting Loud and Clear. But I have to say, in the last days, we see Google has taken down Press TV. We see Telesur under attack. We see RT and Sputnik required to register as foreign agents. We see Facebook and other social media taking down alternative media Because without the alternative media, the American people and people generally cannot possibly learn the truth, because the function of corporate-owned media is not to tell the truth, but to function as an echo chamber for U.S. government propaganda.
Right.
That's why as we do our show every day, John and I realize that we know the same things about the same events over the past 30 years, but because he was in the CIA and I was organizing against the CIA, we know things from a completely different point of view originally. But what brings us together is, again, what the U.S. government actually did, and what they did to John Kiriakou, and what they're doing to Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and other whistleblowers. John Kiriakou went from being somebody who was considered legitimate in the Washington political circles to persona non grata and actually a federal prisoner because he committed a great crime. He was the one member of the CIA, the one who told the truth to the American people that the CIA was engaged in a massive torture program, that George W. Bush was lying when he told the American people that torture didn't exist, and because of that, not the torturers, but the person who revealed the torture was sent to prison. And that's how John Kiriakou and myself, in a way, have had our paths crossed. Because John Kiriakou, like anyone who dares, as an act of conscience, to tell the truth about U.S. government illegality or criminal conduct, becomes a target in their crosshairs. Just like the Venezuelan government is a target in their crosshairs, or the Iranian government, or alternative media, you name it. The U.S. government insists that they only have puppets and proxies around the world, but we want free-thinking human beings who can come together and show not profit or exploitation, but genuine human solidarity and cooperation can be the watchword of our species.
That's right.
That's our So John Kiriakou, based on personal experience with and great knowledge of the CIA, is now going to talk about the topic at hand, which is that the U.S. government has relentlessly, enduringly, and comprehensively been engaged in the interference in other countries' democratic processes, not simply trying to overturn elections, but kill the leaders or imprison the leaders who are elected by their own people, but who don't follow the dictates of Washington. It's a great honor to introduce John Kiriakou.
Friend. I have learned more from Brian Becker in the last year and a half than I think I've learned from anybody in my life in any year and a half. I'm honored to be his friend. I want to also thank, a whole bunch of people, the Venezuelan government, the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry, the Venezuelan Embassy, right here where we're celebrating freedom and democracy. I'd like to thank Code Pink and everybody who's been involved in this righteous event. I also would like to invite the Secret Service to come in and listen, because maybe they'll learn something. Well, good, because maybe they'll learn something about rule of law. I want to start by talking to you about a normal event in the daily life of a CIA officer. And I'm going to use a real-life example. I worked in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center for a long time, both before and after the 9/11 attacks. And I had an idea. It was kind of a dumb idea, but you know, what you do is you throw out 30 dumb ideas, and maybe one of them's good, and you get promoted for it. So I went up to the director of counterterrorism. This was Kofor Black, later Ambassador Kofor Black, big muckety muck. And I said, Kofor, I want to talk to you about an idea that I have for an operation. He put up his hands. He said, listen, whatever you want to do, just do it. I have so much money, I can't possibly spend it all. True story. So I did it. I wasted $50,000 in taxpayers' money. Got a couple business class trips to Europe out of it. But that's normal business in the CIA. They have so much money that they can't possibly spend it all. And the way that they get promoted is to do things like overthrow governments. That sounds awful, right?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I went on the internet today to see how many governments the CIA actually overthrew. Just as a CIA operation. I'm not talking about sending troops. I'm not talking about 20 years of economic sanctions. I'm talking about the CIA enacting a policy or program to overthrow a legitimate government.
14, 20, 30.
It starts off with 7. It starts off with 7. And those 7 are, and I'm going to tell you as soon as I can turn the page. Iran, 1953. Boo. We are still paying for that stupid idea. We overthrew that government for what became British Petroleum. Just for the money. Because the Brits asked us to, because they were too weak to do it themselves. And they said, oh, the Americans will do it for us. And we did. Here we are 3 generations later. And people are still dying because of that stupid decision. Guatemala, 1954. Congo, 1960. Dominican Republic, 1961. South Vietnam, 1963. Brazil, 1964. Chile, 1973. You see anything here that might be a pattern? That we overthrow these governments and they're taken over, usually for many, many decades, by either fascist dictators or military juntas? I'd call that failure of a policy. I wouldn't call that a successful foreign policy. Now, out of curiosity, how many countries has the US government tried to overthrow since the end of the Second World War? There's actually a number. People have documented this, like William Bloom. How many? 40 what? 42?
31.
57 countries. I'm a Greek American, very proudly so. And I have lots and lots of cousins still in Greece who lived through the military dictatorship there. There's a word for it in Greek, it just means the 7 years. Because those 7 years were so terrible and so many people died that they can't even bring themselves to call it anything else but the 7 years. And all you have to say is the 7 years and everybody knows what you're talking about. Tanks in the streets, shooting rounds into college campuses, slaughtering people wholesale. For what? To overthrow a democratically elected government, to install a military dictatorship that suspends all human rights and civil liberties, for it to then collapse under its own weight after killing everybody or exiling those they couldn't kill, and then to see the country sort of wrench back to democracy on its own, not with US help. So what happens, even when a country makes it back to democracy, what happens is they hate the United States, right? I have cousins who are just working people, farmers, taxi drivers, and now they're members of radical parties, the Communist Party, because the United States and its actions so hurt them, so damaged their families, that they just can't get past it. Multiply that by 57. You know, the Gallup organization came out with a poll just within the past year. And they did this poll in almost every country in the world. Obviously, there are some countries that they don't have access to. But in almost every country in the world, what was the country that is the greatest threat to human rights and to freedom? The United States!
USA! USA! USA!
There were 2 countries where that wasn't the case. Anybody want to guess what they were? And the US and Israel. They said it was Iran that was the biggest threat to the world. Because obviously the Iranians, with their nuclear missiles and their submarines and their aircraft carriers off the coast, they're a great threat to the United States. So this is not something that is accidental. This isn't something that's one policy gone wrong. This is who we are. And it's who we are because we allow it to happen as a people, as a country. It wouldn't occur to most other governments on the planet to say, you know what, I don't like his politics. I think I'm going to invade him. I'll tell you another thing that happened to me when I was at the CIA. I had come back from overseas duty in Pakistan, and I got promoted. I became the executive assistant to the deputy director. It's a big job, big deal, right? You have access to everything. So my first day on the job, my boss said to me, well, actually, I said to him, so what are we doing? Right? I didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I know is that I had this new job. So what do you want me to do? He said, I can't tell you until you have to sign these secrecy agreements. I said, okay. I went up to the 7th floor, it's the executive floor, knocked on a door. I said, I'm supposed to sign some secrecy agreements. I had to sign 6 different documents. When I finished signing the 6th one, I said, so what gives? And the guy says, well, and I should tell you, this is in July of 2002. He said, next February, we're going to invade Iraq, we're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein, and we're going to open the world's largest Air Force base so that we can move all of our air assets from the Persian Gulf into Iraq and deprive Osama bin Laden of the ability to say that we are polluting the land of the 2 holy mosques. I looked at this guy like he was insane. And all I could think to stammer out was, we haven't caught bin Laden yet. I thought that's what this whole thing was about. We're supposed to catch bin Laden. He killed 3,000 Americans. And he said, look, the decision's been made. You can bitch all you want. Nobody's going to listen to you. This is what we're doing. And so that's what we did. Now, a few weeks later, I went back up to his office. And I'm telling you this because this is typical of what happens in the CIA and the White House and the Pentagon and even the State Department. I guarantee you it's happening right now as we're speaking. I went into his office, and he was at his desk with a white piece of paper and a box of Crayola markers, colored markers. I said, what you doing? He said, I'm designing the new Iraqi flag. I said, don't you think maybe the Iraqis should do that? And he said, no. But that's the arrogance that we see in our policy. That's a normal event, to have a GS-15 bureaucrat designing another country's flag to be imposed on them, by the way, that had exactly the same colors as the Israeli flag, which I'm convinced was not an accident. That's the way government works in this country. I wanted to also talk about the mechanism for overthrowing a government. You know, there's actually a bureaucracy to this. And this is the thing about the CIA. People think that the CIA is everywhere and is everything. The truth is, there are a lot of morons at the CIA, first of all. There are a lot of psychopaths and sociopaths, and we can get into that in a minute. But it's a big, slow, lumbering bureaucracy, just like everything else in government is. And so if some dope comes up with an idea, you know, I want to overthrow, let's say, the Venezuelan government, there's a process that he goes through. There's an office. As crazy as this sounds, there's an office that you go to overthrow a government. I'm not allowed to say the name of it, it's classified. But rest assured, there's a certain office that you go to. And you tell the people in this office, yeah, there's this, I want to overthrow this government. And, you know, if somebody objects, they can object after the plan is in train, and then, you know, it'll die. But I want to overthrow the government. And they say, okay, well, we'll write up a plan, and then we'll see what happens. I'm not making light of this. This is honest to God. As God is my witness, this is the way it works. This office writes up the plan, and they send it to the Justice Department to make sure that it's legal. It goes to something called the Office of Legal Counsel, OLC. We all know about OLC. We all know about John Yoo and Jay Bybee and how they made an elephant stand on its trunk to make torture legal in the early part of the last decade. But it goes to OLC, and OLC, while it is supposed to say, oh, you know what, this is not legal, there are 3 things that would make an attack on a foreign country legal. It's very clear, everybody knows this, is it's if the country attacks you, if you are invited in by the country, or if the United Nations Security Council votes to give you the permission to enter the country. And that's it. That's clear. It's international law. But what they do at OLC is they twist and warp U.S. law to make it stand on its trunk to justify this clearly illegal program. And they write this up. It's highly classified, so nobody knows about it. So don't bother writing your congressman. He's going to think you're a nut. And then it goes to the National Security Council at the White House. Well, the National Security Council is political. So when I say it goes to the National Security Council, I mean it goes to John Bolton. And it says, "Dear Mr. Bolton, the CIA wants to overthrow the Venezuelan government. We think it's legal for these reasons. What do you think?" Seriously. And he says, "I think that is a good idea." And the Justice Department thinks it's legal, so it must be legal, and he signs it. And then it goes back to the CIA with all the signatures on it. I should say, in the interim, he advises the president to sign it, and the president finally signs it. And then it goes back to the CIA, and it sits in a vault in the operations center, and a copy in a vault in the director's office. Now, I was there the day that the torture program was approved. And I remember the deputy director interrupting me during my briefing repeatedly to say, "I can't believe the president signed that memo. I can't believe the president signed that memo." What they had done with the torture program is they just asked for the moon and the stars, thinking somebody at some level will say, "Oh, come on, we can't do this. We can't waterboard people and murder them and put them in, coffins with boxes of cockroaches to make them insane." But nobody took anything out. And so the president signed it, and the deputy director kept saying, "I can't believe the president signed that memo." Mark my words, the same thing is happening right now with Venezuela. Somebody at the CIA wrote a memo, "We should overthrow the government of Venezuela." Justice said, "That sounds legal." And John Bolton said, "Not only does it sound legal, it sounds like a great idea, and that should be U.S. policy." And I also guarantee you that they've had the same conversations about Iran and a half a dozen other countries. And then it went to the president. Anybody want to put money on whether the president signed this memo or not? I wouldn't want to make that bet. And then it went to the CIA. That's what happens. But in the end, nothing good comes of any of this. We've got lessons learned. We've seen what's happened in Iran and the Dominican Republic and Guatemala and Greece and Cyprus and Honduras and the Philippines and everywhere else where we've overthrown governments. Nothing good ever comes of it. So I would posit, and I would say this to any American, if you are a patriot, the only position that you can take is to oppose this government's position on Venezuela. It's the only legal and moral position to take. But, as Brian Becker said, I don't know where Brian went. As Brian Becker said, we're propagandized as a people. We are fed only what the big corporations and the U.S. government want us to read. Thank you. I don't watch network news anymore. I can't force myself through it. I want to read Telesur. I want to read RT and Sputnik and Al Jazeera. And I mean, people ask me, where do you get your news? And then when I tell them, they laugh at me. Oh, well, I watch MSNBC. Besides my own personal beef with MSNBC. But I feel like I have to have alternative news because that's the only way to really understand what's happening in the world. There's not a giant conspiracy against the American people to trick us into thinking that Juan Guaido is the legitimate president of Venezuela. Juan Guaido is a schmo from GW grad school that nobody ever heard of, and somebody at the White House said, you know what, this guy should be the president, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. He's just some guy from GW. Ooh, and I have both my degrees from GW, and I'm telling you, the man's not qualified in the first place. Anyway, I'm going to keep it short because it's hot, and there are a lot of us, and I'm happy to even take questions if we're doing that kind of thing. But thank you for being here. Keep up the fight. We got to fight the Secret Service because I know in my bones that they're planning something that's grossly illegal. It's a terrible violation of international law. Thank you for having me, and keep up the fight. Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman is the question. I've been on Democracy Now! Half a dozen times. I am so grossly disappointed in what has happened to Democracy Now! The last 6 or 8 months. I can't bring myself to watch her anymore. I just can't. It was like overnight she drank the Kool-Aid. And I don't know what the precipitating event was, but I on these issues, like Venezuela, for example, or even Iran, I just can't take her seriously anymore. And that's very sad. I'm disappointed in that. Yes, ma'am.
If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Thanks, everybody. I just wanted to make sure you're listening. So my question isn't so much a question as more a statement. We all know that the sort of thought process that runs through the U.S. government is who are these people governing on our oil and natural resources? Woo! How do we get their oil and natural resources?
Yes.
And my comment or question rather is, as the people of the United States who are forward thinking and progressive, how do we stop our evil country from taking over these countries' self-determinations and taking and stealing their natural resources? Like, what do we as a people do? I don't want a coup in Venezuela. I don't want a U.S.-backed tin-pot dictator in Venezuela. I want the Venezuelan people to have self-determination and to rule and control their own natural resources. But the U.S., this huge imperialist force, is just looming over them, waiting to snatch their oil.
Yeah.
What do we as a people do?
It's about natural resources. And you know, I never, call me naive, but I never really gave that much of a thought until 1991. I was working on Iraq and Kuwait during the first Gulf War, and I was in Saudi Arabia waiting to go into Kuwait with the Marines on Liberation Day, which I did. And I said to one of the guys that went in with us, one of the embassy guys, how proud I was to be a part of this, to liberate this country and to liberate the country and bring democracy and human rights. And he looked at me like I was nuts, which I was. Well, also, in my own defense, I was 25 years old.
Hey, man,
And
I'm 23.
I said, you know,
Let the record reflect.
this is really a great day. And he said, if this country had gravel instead of oil, do you think we would give two shits about what happens to these people?
Hell no.
No. No. And that's why when the news came out that Afghanistan has $1 trillion worth of rare earth metals, should anybody be surprised that we're still in Afghanistan? No. And Venezuela has lots and lots of oil. Some say, oh, it's dirty oil, it's full of sulfur, it's not like Libyan oil. Yeah, well, guess what? It's a day's boat ride from the refineries in Texas. So I agree with you. At the risk of sounding cynical, this is all about oil, and we want their oil.
You didn't answer
Yes,
my
sir.
question. What do
You-
we do?
Yeah,
Okay,
what do we
next
do?
one.
We're doing what we do. And now I gotta look for Brian Becker again. We gotta talk to Brian Becker because I've never seen anybody organize people like Brian Becker does. It's ridiculous. On no notice, he can turn 50,000 people out on the mall. And I'll tell you another thing about Brian. Is Brian here? No? I'll tell you another thing that Brian did that I thought was a stroke of genius. No sooner were the words out of Donald Trump's mouth that he wants to have a military parade in his own honor Brian was standing outside the Department of Interior, and he reserved all possible parade routes in all of Washington for the Answer Coalition. And there never was any military parade. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to the racial element of this coup? Because isn't Guaido
Yeah.
anti-black or something like that? And what's
Yeah.
their motto?
Can I talk to about the racial component of this? That's an important question, and it's one that really is not being addressed in any of the mainstream outlets. Juan Guaido's a fascist. Let's just call a spade here. The man's a fascist. He's allied with another fascist, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. He's allied with extreme right-wingers in Colombia. And yeah, I mean, these are the white people of Latin America. They're the Spanish and Portuguese, descendants of Spanish and Portuguese immigrants in Latin America. They don't like the indigenous people. They took the country from them. They took the resources from them. And by God, they hate being in the minority. And so I think this is all part of a broader racial issue to keep indigenous people down and to make sure that white right-wingers control the economies.
Don't they call themselves Spaniards versus Venezuelans?
Yes, actually, they call themselves Spaniards. I've heard that myself.
Yeah,
And
but-
not just in Venezuela, but elsewhere.
Don't they have
In
a-
Guatemala, for example, they don't call themselves Guatemalans. They call themselves Spaniards. Absolutely right.
Carlos over here.
Sure.
Thank you. Maybe you can repeat, they don't hear back. I would like to hear a little bit more about your experience in the CIA. You mentioned one psychopath, you mentioned another one that seemed to be cynic, but I would like to know, do the people there from your experience, I mean, some of them are brainwashed, some of them really believe in what they're doing, that this is righteous?
Great question.
What's your experience?
Great question. So in my own experience in the CIA, can I talk about some of the people that I knew? What are the people like in general? It's not an easy answer. Most people are there just because they're patriotic, and they think that they can express their patriotism by doing whatever it is the CIA wants them to do, whether it's analysis or operations, or if they're scientists, they work in technology, the Science and Technology Directorate. They just want to do something in public service. They think that they're doing the right thing. In the Directorate of Operations, though, the culture is wildly different. A CIA psychiatrist once told me that the CIA seeks to actively hire people who have sociopathic tendencies, not sociopaths. Sociopaths have no conscience. They easily pass a polygraph because they don't register guilt in any way. But it's easy for a sociopath to slip through the process because if you don't feel guilt, you don't react to the polygraph exam. And so you get people who are cowboys just by virtue of their own personal beliefs, and then you train them and give them weapons and literally unlimited budgets, and you send them overseas. I'll give you one example. I won't use his name, although it's out there in the press. I'm not going to use it. As I said earlier, I worked in the Counterterrorism Center for many years. I sat about 10 feet away from a guy who was working on Latin American issues. And he was a nice enough guy. He'd say good morning every day, and I'd say good morning to him. You know, how's your family? Nice. How was your vacation? Whatever. I never really was clear on exactly what he did, because he was part of a group called, I won't tell you what it was called. It was a very onerous title for a group. It had the word special in it. Yeah, so they were doing something special I wasn't ready to. It was after I left the CIA that he retired, and Vanity Fair did a feature story about him. And as it turns out, he had been a hitman for the Cali cartel before joining the CIA. So he was a mass murderer, but by God, he was patriotic. And so they hired him. So what did they hire him to do? They hired him to kill people. That's all. His job was to kill people. I worked with a guy in the Middle East just before 9/11. Very closely. We even roomed together overseas. And then 9/11 happened, and I lost track of him for about 8 weeks. And then I ran into him in the hall. And I said, "Hey, Billy, where you been?" And he said, "Been in Afghanistan," very quietly. "Been in Afghanistan." I said, "What are you doing in Afghanistan?" He looked at me like I was crazy. He says, "I've been killing people. What do you think I've been doing?" And I realized I had been begging to go to Afghanistan because I was a fluent Arabic speaker, and they wouldn't send me. Well, then I realized why. trying to interview anybody. They're not capturing people to interrogate them. They were murdering them. So that's the attitude inside the Directorate of Operations. There aren't just sociopaths who slip through the cracks. There are psychopaths. And I'm going to go one beyond that, too. There are 1 million psychological studies out there, from the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, even in Psychology Today magazine, saying that virtually every major CEO in America is a sociopath, a clinical sociopath. Because the only way that you can work your way up to that level is to have no conscience as you claw your way to the top, stepping on the backs of everybody around you. Well, the CIA is a big company, just like any other big organization where lives are at stake and the stakes are very high. So, of course, the CIA's leadership is going to be made up of sociopaths and psychopaths. People who can kill without giving it a second thought and go to bed at night and sleep like a baby. And that's not an organization I wanted to be in anymore. Sir?
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about Gina Haspel and how it was that she was appointed by Trump and her role in the torture?
Gina Haspel. I worked for Gina. I wrote a 1,200-word op-ed in the Washington Post about Gina. That's why the FBI still sits in front of my house, taking pictures. Gina Haspel. Gina, in my view, Gina's a sociopath. And I'm not saying anything here that's not been in the press. Well, Gina was a very senior officer in the Counterterrorism Center when I was there. She was a 32-year operational veteran, recruiting spies to steal secrets all over the world. Never married, devoted solely to the job. And she was a protege of Jose Rodriguez. Jose Rodriguez was the head of counterterrorism after Cofer Black was. Actually, the night before I went to prison, Jose tweeted at me. And he said, "Don't drop the soap, asshole." And I tweeted back, "Jose, I am on the right side of history, and you are not." Yeah. She was his protege. And when Jose became the deputy director, he made Gina the head of counterterrorism. Gina continued to move up. Well, when she was the head of counterterrorism, she flew out to one of the secret sites just to watch a prisoner be tortured. Not for any other reason. She was so senior and so important that she really ought to have just stayed in her office at headquarters thinking the big thoughts. But she wanted to see it and enjoy it. Yeah. And so she did. And she's never had to answer for that. I wrote an op-ed just recently. There was a document that was declassified as part of the Guantanamo hearing on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I'm not joking, on page 22,046 of this document, totally serious. They don't release it all at one time, they release it in little bits. It said that Gina was the chief of base at Guantanamo during the torture program. Nobody knew that. So she has this in her blood. She likes this. She's into it. And I think that that's so incredibly dangerous and sick. That's exactly the person that you don't want to be in a position like that. But somehow Gina has been able to win over both the Obama people and the Trump people because they all loved her. Don't forget that she made the senior service under Obama. She ended up running counterterrorism under Obama and being made deputy director of the CIA under Obama. Trump just promoted her.
So wait, we're gonna have to.
Okay. Should I take one more?
So let's take one last
Go ahead,
one.
take it.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about social media and these attempted coups? I think it was really used effectively in Nicaragua last year.
Social media in the attempted coups, it was used effectively in Nicaragua. And you know what? Well, actually, Brian and I have talked about this on our show. When it appeared that the uprising, what was it, the Green Revolution, I think they called it, in Iran, had a chance of succeeding, Hillary Clinton personally called Twitter and asked them not to do their nightly maintenance so that Twitter would remain up, so the opposition could continue to organize to overthrow the Iranian government. So there's a real role for social media. Now, we can do the same kind of thing by sharing our information on social media. I will advise one note of caution. and that is that the cops are on social media too. Not just local cops harassing, the Wall Street protesters. I mean FBI, CIA, DEA, ATF, they're all on social media. They all have fake accounts and they're all spying on us. Besides the fact that Facebook, Twitter, Google, everybody has formal relationships with the FBI and the CIA. So even if they're not spying on your account, Facebook and Twitter and the others will voluntarily give your information to them.
I'm talking about the other side, like
On-
3 million WhatsApps in a population of 6 million.
Yes, on the other side, that's a good point. On the other side, this could be the savior of some of these democratic movements. If you've got WhatsApp and it's not taken down by the government, or Viber, for example, or Signal, something that's encrypted.
I'm talking about when the national endowment.
Okay, let him answer because we can't have a correspondence.
Yeah.
People can't hear you.
On the other side, you mean? You mean the people in the streets using it?
How the United States uses social media.
Listen, we've got, right, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. How the U.S. subsidizes it. Always, they've always done this. Listen, every English language radio station in Yemen, I'm telling you from firsthand experience, is a Department of Defense propaganda operation. Every one of them. And they try to mimic NPR on purpose. They call it Yemeni Voices, right? But it's all propaganda. This is an active program used by all the major departments and agencies to spread propaganda, especially among the youth. Now, this is our taxpayer money at work. That's also something that's very dangerous that our members of Congress do nothing about. Listen, thank you so much. It was a real
Thank you, John, for that amazing presentation and for what you do to educate the American public. And we are so grateful that you came here tonight for a very historic talk at a very critical moment in Venezuela's history. So if you could all stop your live streaming and your filming, you could stop